Stop for a second and look around. Are you sure you know the history of the world in which you live? From childhood, a linear concept of progress was hammered into our heads. First a digging stick, then the wheel, then the steam engine, and finally the smartphone. But what if I tell you that this line is broken? What if you and I are not the pinnacle of evolution, but merely feral descendants who settled the ruins of a more advanced civilization, having appropriated its achievements? Today we will tear the mask off one of the most obvious, yet at the same time most ignored facts of our reality. We will talk about giant bridges and viaducts that lead to nowhere, about colossal engineering structures standing amidst boundless fields, remote forests, and deserted valleys, where, according to the official version of history, there were never any large cities or industrial centers. Historians convince us that in the 19th century, when the primary mode of transport was a horse and cart, and the planet's population was many times smaller than it is today, rulers and industrialists suddenly decided to build infrastructure with a safety margin for thousands of years to come. Sounds noble, doesn't it? Care for descendants, infrastructure for future growth. But let's cast aside sentimentality and engage cold logic and a calculator. History is not tales of good kings. It is first and foremost economics, resources, and logistics. Any builder will tell you that constructing a bridge is one of the most complex and expensive engineering tasks. That's millions of dollars even by modern standards. Now imagine you are a 19th century capitalist. Your goal is profit. Would you invest colossal funds, equivalent to modern billions, in the construction of a giant stone viaduct in an open field, where 1.5 villages reside, hoping that in 100 years, perhaps, a city will be built here? The answer is obvious. No one ever freezes capital in stone without the guarantee of an immediate return. Infrastructure always, do you hear me, always follows population and needs, not the other way around. First, a city, factory, or trade hub appears, and only then are roads extended and bridges built to it. But we see the opposite picture. Look at the viaducts in Scotland, in German Saxony, in the hinterlands of the United States of America, or even in the Russian provinces. These are cyclopean structures made of red brick or hewn stone, consisting of dozens of arches as tall as a 10-story building. The official plaque reads, "Year of construction, 1840 or 1850. We are told that these structures were built for railways. But allow me, look at the width of these bridges. Many of them are designed for 4 or even 6 tracks. Why? In the mid-19th century, steam locomotives were a rarity. Trains ran once a week, and a single track was more than enough. Why lay down excessive capacity, which we do not fully utilize even today in the 21st century? This is economic suicide. Unless these bridges were built by those for whom a throughput capacity of thousands of tons of cargo per minute was an everyday reality. Let's delve into details that make official historians' hands tremble. Materials science. Let's take, for example, the famous Goldstahlbrücke Viaduct in Germany. It is the largest brick bridge in the world. Its length is over 0.5 kilometer. Its height is 78 meters. It is officially stated that 26 million bricks were used for its construction. 26 million. Think about this number. We are told that it was built in just 5 years, from 1846 to 1851. Let's calculate. There are 365 days in a year. In 5 years, that's approximately 1,800 days. To lay 26 million bricks, workers would have had to lay 14,000 bricks per day, without weekends, holidays, or winter breaks. And this is not just laying a barn wall. This is an extremely complex arched structure, requiring ideal geometry, load calculations, and time for the mortar to set. But it's not even the laying speed that raises the main question. Where did these bricks come from? There are no giant factories in the vicinity capable of producing such volumes. To fire 26 million bricks, mountains of coal and enormous kilns are needed. Where are the traces of this industry? Where are the quarries from which clay was extracted? The surrounding landscape is pristine. No waste heaps, no kiln remnants. It feels as if the bricks materialized out of thin air. Or, more likely, this bridge stood there long before people with rulers arrived and attributed its construction to themselves. Another inconvenient fact is logistics. In the mid-19th century, roads were waterlogged dirt tracks. How to deliver millions of tons of building materials to a construction site in a forest or in the mountains? By carts. Can you imagine a procession of hundreds of thousands of carts hauling bricks, stone, cement, tools, and provisions for an army of workers day and night? The roads would have simply vanished under such traffic, turning into a quagmire. But there is no mention of a transport collapse or grandiose logistical operations in the archives. There are only dry reports about the opening date and the names of the architects. It gives the impression that we are being shown the finale of a play, while concealing that the scenery was built by a completely different troupe of actors. And the most terrifying thing, why build viaducts of such height over tiny rivers that can be easily forded? Engineers will say to maintain the gradient of the railway track, but look closer. Many of these viaducts connect one hill to another, passing over a completely empty valley. Moreover, there are often no embankments nearby continuing the path. The bridge simply sticks out of the landscape, like a dinosaur bone. As if there was a completely different topography here before, a different ground or water level. As if these bridges were part of a unified transport network encircling the planet. A network that was destroyed by a global catastrophe, and we are merely using the surviving fragments, clumsily adapting them for our primitive trains. Do you still believe that peasants with shovels built this for transporting coal? Let's get up close to the supports of these cyclopean bridges. This is not just a pile of stones held together by lime mortar. Before us are masterpieces of engineering thought, the level of execution of which often surpasses modern standards. We are told that this was done by illiterate workers, yesterday's peasants, armed with a chisel, hammer, and a wooden square. Have you ever tried to work granite with a chisel? Granite is one of the hardest rocks on Earth. To carve a block of ideal geometric shape from it, you need steel tools with diamond coating or carbide inserts, which officially did not exist in the mid-19th century. The iron of that time was soft. It would dull against granite after every 10 blows. Now look at the viaducts. There are thousands, tens of thousands of such blocks, and they are fitted together so tightly that you cannot even slip a razor blade between them. This is so-called polygonal masonry, or ideal block assembly, without mortar. The stone holds due to its own weight and the perfect adhesion of surfaces. Skeptics will say, they had plenty of time and cheap labor. This is the favorite argument of official science when there are no facts to counter with. But time is money, and cheap labor means low qualification. To create such a bridge, every stonemason would have to be a virtuoso. Where were these armies of virtuosos trained? In parochial schools? And most importantly, where are the traces of their tools? On the stones, we often see strange marks, either perfectly smooth cuts, as if a knife passed through butter, or characteristic grooves left only by a high-speed circular saw or milling cutter. We see machine processing. This is a fact, solidified in stone. Or perhaps these blocks were not cut, but cast. The technology of geopolymer concrete or artificial stone, whose secret was supposedly discovered only in the 20th century, might have been known to the builders of these viaducts. They simply took local rock, ground it, added a binder, and poured it into formwork. This explains both the speed and the absence of quarries and the perfect fit. But if they had stone casting technologies, then this completely changes the picture of our civilization's development. It means that the industrial era did not begin with Watt's steam engine, but was inherited from someone who possessed chemistry and physics at an unattainable level. Now let's turn to demography, a science that does not tolerate lies. The construction of a giant object requires the concentration of a huge number of people. Take, for example, the construction of the Trans-Siberian Railway or the Hoover Dam. These are entire temporary cities, hospitals, cemeteries, provision depots. Tens of thousands of people need somewhere to sleep, something to eat, somewhere to go to the toilet. Around any large 19th century viaduct standing in the wilderness, there should be remnants of a huge construction camp infrastructure. Foundations of barracks, latrines, mountains of broken dishes, lost tools, graves of those who died from accidents and epidemics. But archaeologists find nothing there. Emptiness, a clear field, as if the bridge was lowered from the heavens by helicopters. Or perhaps it stood there for centuries, and the builders of the 19th century were only engaged in cosmetic repairs, painting railings and laying sleepers. Look at old daguerreotypes and photographs from the mid-19th century. This was a time when photography had just appeared. What do we see in pictures of cities and engineering structures? Emptiness. Huge, majestic squares of St. Petersburg, Paris, Rome, Berlin, and not a soul. Majestic bridges over which no carriages travel. Historians explain this by the long exposure time of cameras. They say people moved and blurred, disappearing from the frame. This is a lie, designed for amateurs. With an exposure of several minutes, moving objects leave ghostly traces, blurred streaks. But there are no streaks in the photos. The streets are deserted. The cities stand empty, as if after a neutron bomb. And in these empty settings stand brand new, pristine, gigantic bridges and viaducts. For whom were they built? Where are the millions of inhabitants who should be using this infrastructure? Population statistics from those years show figures that in no way reconcile with the scale of construction. We are told about the rapid growth of cities, but if we take official census data and compare it with the volume of housing stock and infrastructure, a paradox emerges. The infrastructure is designed for a population 5 to 10 times larger than what was officially recorded. Who lived in these cities before us? Where did these people disappear to? A strong feeling arises that we, current humanity, arrived to find everything ready-made. We are like squatters who have settled an empty mansion. We found these cities and bridges, dug them out from clay and dirt, named them after ourselves, and began to exploit them without even understanding the true purpose of these structures. Consider railways. Why is it that almost everywhere in the world, with rare exceptions, a standard gauge close to 143.5 centimeters is used? We are told that this is a legacy of the axle width of Roman chariots. Seriously? You want to say that 19th century engineers, creating advanced transport, oriented themselves towards 2,000-year-old carts? Or is the truth that the gauge was dictated by already existing tracks and bridges? We couldn't make trains wider because they wouldn't fit into existing tunnels and onto existing viaducts. We simply adjusted to the standards of an ancient global network. These bridges were not built for steam locomotives. A steam locomotive is a primitive furnace on wheels that barely pulls its own weight. Viaducts, with their colossal carrying capacity and width, were intended for entirely different transport. Heavy, high speed, perhaps using different principles of movement than the friction of a wheel on a rail. There is another detail that shatters the official picture. Many viaducts have strange architectural elements, towers, niches, voids inside the supports that serve no constructive function. Officially, this is decoration. But why decorate a bridge support in a forest where no one sees it? What if it's not decoration? What if these voids are places for equipment, resonators, atmospheric electricity accumulators? We see only a stone skeleton from which all the filling has been removed. We look at a de-energized microprocessor and think it's just a beautiful tile. Now that we have questioned the official construction timelines and technologies, it's time to look down. Not at the water flowing under the bridge, but at the earth from which these gigantic supports grow. Have you ever noticed the strange disproportion of many viaducts? Massive, wide arches that seem too squat, as if a giant has been concreted up to his knees. Official science calls this foundation peculiarities, or sediment deposits. We are told about the so-called cultural layer. They say that over 100 or 200 years, a meter or two of dirt, dust, and debris accumulates. But wait, we are not talking about cities with their dense development, but about viaducts in fields and forests. How could 3, 5, or sometimes even 10 meters of cultural layer accumulate there? Who littered so intensely in the remote taiga or prairies that it changed the horizon level? The truth is that these bridges are not just standing on the ground. They have grown into it. Or more precisely, they were covered. If you excavate at the base of many ancient bridges, which, by the way, is sometimes done during restoration, a shocking picture emerges. The supports go deep down, and there, beneath layers of clay and sand, continuations of arches are found, full-fledged stories that were once above ground. Engineers never designed delicate arches only to immediately bury them with earth. This is a senseless waste of effort and a weakening of the structure. For the foundation, a solid monolith is used. If there is an arch underground, it means that air, water, or a road once passed through it. This is irrefutable proof that the planet's ground level rose sharply quite recently, in the mid-19th century. We have arrived at the most terrifying event, traces of which they are trying to erase from textbooks. A global flood, or a catastrophic mud flow that covered most continents with a mass of clay. Look at the rivers flowing under these gigantic viaducts. Most often, they are pathetic trickles that can be jumped over. They are disproportionate to the grandeur of the bridge. A kilometer-long viaduct is thrown across a river 5 meters wide. Geologists tell us that the river shrank, but the riverbeds of the valleys suggest otherwise. These valleys were scoured by colossal currents of water that flowed here on a broad front. The bridges were built precisely over these full-flowing arteries, or over densely populated lowlands that are now buried under a thick layer of alluvial clay. This is why these bridges lead to nowhere. These are not design flaws. These are surviving fragments of a destroyed network. Imagine that the road on the embankment was washed away. Cities in the lowlands were destroyed and covered with silt, but the heavy stone bridges stood firm like dinosaur skeletons. We, the survivors or new settlers who came to these lands, simply laid our dirt paths over the deposits, connected our rails to those sections of the bridges that remained above the surface, and declared this our achievement. This explains why the entrances to many bridges look absurd. Sharp ascents, strange embankments that were clearly added later to somehow connect the broken levels. Now, compare this with the phenomenon of buried floors of buildings around the world. Moscow, Paris, New York, Omsk, everywhere we see houses whose first floors are submerged in the ground and turned into basements. Windows looking into the soil, doors leading nowhere underground. They lie to us about buildings settling and about it being fashionable to build that way. But bridges cannot settle 10 meters and remain intact. The clay that buried the first floors of cities is the same clay that hides the foundations of great viaducts. These are traces of the same catastrophe. And here arises the most chilling question: what happened to the population? If a cataclysm of such magnitude occurred that the geography of valleys changed and the ground level rose by meters, this means the death of millions, if not billions, of people. And here, the demographic statistics of the 19th century begin to fall apart. We see strange gaps in data, mass migrations, the appearance of a huge number of orphans. Remember the orphan trains in the United States, when tens of thousands of children were taken from cities and sent to farms. Where did so many homeless children come from in what seemed to be peacetime? Where were their parents? Why were hundreds of orphanages opened worldwide in the mid-19th century? The answer is frightening in its simplicity. The adult population that built and operated these magnificent structures was destroyed, washed away, buried, perished from the consequences of the cataclysm, famine, and cold. Only children and a handful of survivors remained, who lost technologies and knowledge. A reset occurred. Humanity was thrown back in development. We settled the ruins, dug up what we could, and started life anew, inventing a fairy tale about gradual evolution and technical progress. We look at bridges built by the titans of the past and attribute their authorship to ourselves, so as not to go mad with terror, realizing that we live on the graveyard of a great civilization. But that's not all. If bridges are remnants of a transport system, then what exactly were they transporting? Why is their construction so excessively strong? Remove the veil from your eyes and look at these structures not as roads for carriages, but as elements of a gigantic technical scheme. If we assume that the official version of their transport purpose is a lie, invented to conceal the true technology, then the puzzle immediately falls into place. Let's talk about materials. What are these viaducts built from? They are made of red brick and granite. Geologists and physicists know that red brick, fired at certain temperatures, contains iron oxide and acquires semiconductor properties. Granite, from which the supports and key nodes are built, is saturated with quartz. Quartz is a piezoelectric material. If a quartz crystal is compressed, it generates an electric current. This is physics, 8th grade. Now imagine a viaduct weighing millions of tons. Gravity presses on the granite supports with tremendous force. Quartz crystals in the stone structure are under constant static tension. This structure is a giant piezoelectric generator that operates 24 hours a day, simply because it is heavy. But that's not all. Look at where these bridges stand. They are always built over water obstacles, even if there is very little water there now. Flowing water is not just a liquid. It is an electrolyte, a moving conductor. The movement of water creates a weak electromagnetic field. The arched structure of the bridge, like a lens or a resonator, focuses and amplifies these fields. We look at a viaduct and see a road. But our ancestors saw it as a power bus, an element of a circuit. Remember the metal clamps and ties that fasten stones in ancient masonry? Officially, they are for strength. But why fasten stones with iron that rusts and expands, destroying the stone from within? This is an engineering absurdity, unless these ties served as conductors, connecting the stone blocks into a single electrical circuit. Now let's scale the picture. Look at the map of the location of these bridges to nowhere and overlay it with the map of the so-called star forts, strange, star-shaped earthen fortifications scattered across the planet. You will see a frightening pattern. Bridges and viaducts often lie on straight lines connecting these stars, or are nodal points in this geometry. Star forts are not defensive structures. Their walls are too low for defense against cannons, and their shape is ideal for wave processors, for receiving and distributing energy. The bridges were arteries of this system. They transmitted energy, vibration, information from one station to another. It was a single planetary energy network, wireless and free. This is why they are so enormous. Their size was dictated not by the dimensions of a cart, but by the wavelength and the necessary resonance. This is why they stand in open fields. Previously, this field was part of a single industrial or residential cluster that was powered by this energy. We live on the ruins of a gigantic motherboard, where fortresses are capacitors, temples with domes are inductors, and bridges and viaducts are conductive traces. And now the most terrifying realization. If this was an energy system, then why is it shut down? Why do the bridges lead to nowhere? because the circuit was deliberately broken. Look at many destroyed viaducts. They did not collapse from old age. Their central spans are missing, as if someone precisely cut the wires. These are traces of war. A war not for territories, but for resources and control over energy. The one who won this 19th century war first destroyed the free energy system. Why? Because free energy makes people free. If you have heat and light that you take from the ether or from the earth's vibration, you cannot be forced to work for pennies in a coal mine. You cannot be taxed per kilowatt hour. You cannot be controlled. The victors who seized the world after the catastrophe dismantled the high-tech nodes, removed the filling from the bridges, leaving only the stone framework, and rewrote history. They instilled in us that coal, oil, and gas are the only sources of energy, forcing us to pay for what was once a gift from the planet. We look at viaducts and admire the skill of stonemasons, not realizing that we are looking at de-energized generators. We are like savages who found a broken smartphone and use it as a cutting board, admiring how smooth and hard its glass is. Have you noticed the fury with which ancient architecture was destroyed in the 20th century? Beautiful buildings were demolished, bridges were blown up, replaced by ugly concrete boxes. We were told, dilapidated housing, modernization. A lie. It was a cleanup of evidence. Everything that could hint at the technologies of the past was destroyed. Every ancient bridge torn down is a secret of resonance and acoustics lost forever. We lost the secret of eternal concrete, the secret of granite processing, the secret of atmospheric electricity. We traded divine technologies for the internal combustion engine, which pollutes the sky and kills us. And now you stand before this fact. You have been robbed. Not just history was stolen from you. Your future, which your ancestors had, was stolen from you. You were turned into consumers of resources, though you could have been masters of energies. These bridges to nowhere are not monuments of the past. They are silent witnesses to a crime of planetary scale. They scream that there was a civilization of gods here that was crushed into dust, and we were forced to forget even their names. But if the system was destroyed, then somewhere there must be control centers. Somewhere there must be those who pressed the off button. And the most intriguing thing is, perhaps this system is not completely destroyed, but merely switched off. Perhaps these stones are still waiting for a signal to hum again and start generating energy?